Sparkly metallic thread. Love it or hate it, there's no denying that it can make your work really pop and adds just a little bit of extra, je ne sais quoi, to your work. So here is some metallic sparkle thread here. It's a common question in my Facebook group and in my Instagram DMs about what is the best way to work with this thread, because although it looks beautiful, don't be fooled, it can be really tricky at times to stitch with. So I thought I'd put together this little video with some tips and tricks about the best ways to work with sparkle thread, and also what you can do if it all goes a bit wrong, how you can correct your projects. I hope you enjoy. If you would like to give any input into the next videos, and if there's anything you want to see here, recommend joining our Facebook group. It's just search Ellbie Co and you should find it, or also check us out on Instagram. Okay, on with the video. Bye!
So, sparkle thread. Let's start with what it is. Sparkle thread is a metallic embroidery thread. It comes in a variety of different colours, and you can get it in 8-strand or 6-strand. It depends what brand of thread you are using. It's typically quite stiff to stitch with, and you can get it in a multitude of different colours. Mine here is DMC, and you can see it's like a rainbow colour. So I'm just going to show you the sorts of things you can use sparkle thread with. So you can use it for cross stitching. Here I've used it just to outline and pick up the details of this piece symbol. You can also use it for embroidery, like I've done on this patch kit here, just to give a little bit of glitz to this parrot patch. And you can also use it for finer details, such as these little tiny stars on this larger cross stitch. So as you can see, it adds a really nice bit of extra detail, a bit of glitz to your stitching. But I do know that it can be really frustrating to work with, so that's what we're going to go over today and try and make that whole process a bit easier. So we're going to start off by cutting ourselves a smallish piece of sparkle thread. You don't want anything too long, because if you go with something that's over 1 meter in length, then it's going to tangle and be really frustrating to work with. Now, normally with threads, I suggest that you stitch with 2 strands, but instead what we're going to stitch with is just the 1 strand. This prevents the thread from forming lots of knots when we're stitching and just makes everything generally a lot easier. So my golden rule, 1 strand. So start by pinching the other strands of thread and hold them together nicely in your left hand, and in your right hand just pull on the strand that you want to remove. Don't worry if it bunches up like this. It shouldn't not, and you can put those other strands to one side. Then we're going to take that 1 strand and we're going to thread up our needle. Just like so. This can be a little bit fiddly. You can lick the end of the thread if you want to make it go through easier. And then we're going to fold the thread back on itself. So normally you have a little tail, but in this instance, we're not going to have a little tail. We're just going to fold it back. So it looks like it's 2 strands, but really it's just the one folded in half. Then we're going to tie a knot on the end to keep those 2 strands together so that it stays folded in half. I like to do this by just wrapping it around itself and then doing a little twist and a pull, and I do that a few times until I get the size knot that I'm comfortable with. There we go. Nice and easy little knot there for you. So let's start with some Aida fabric. Cross-stitching with sparkle thread can be a bit of a nightmare, so I'm going to give you some tips. This is 14 count Aida, so this is suitable for beginners. You can also use 12 count Aida, and 16 count Aida works quite nicely with sparkle thread as well. So what you're going to want to do is you don't want the strands of thread to separate when you're stitching. You want to to retain an even tension. Sorry, I'm messing up my words there. So we're going to start from the back. We're going to thread through, and as you can see, we're going to pull nice and tight. Make sure that it's all even. There you go. So you can see, so it looks like just 1 strand. Then we're going to do our first stitch across to the opposite hole, keeping it nice and tight. Now, I'm going to let you in on a secret. When you're pulling your thread through, try to pinch it on the other side of your hoop. This helps it to keep a nice even tension, and make sure that you don't get any weird looping on the front, and also makes it a little bit easier to stitch, as I know that sparkle thread can be a bit scratchy and isn't the easiest at getting through those holes on the Ada. So again, I'm kind of keeping it nice and tight, pinching it between my fingers as I'm stitching. And I'm going to go back through and just finish these stitches off. As you can see, I've got caught there, not to worry, able to hook it off. And I'm just keeping that tension nice and even as we pull through for that final stitch. So as you can see, we've got 2 little stitches there, and from the back it looks just as neat as it would with any other embroidery floss. So keeping tension on the back is key when stitching on Ada. It makes all the difference and can make it a lot easier. So let's go on to embroidery. Now I've got some felt here, and we're going to start with some French knots. I know these aren't everybody's favourites, so I thought I might as well show you how to do them with sparkle thread. I promise you it's not as tricky as you think. So I've got a video teaching you how to do French knots actually, so if you're not sure how to do them, I recommend going and clicking on that video first, because this isn't a lesson on how to do French knots. But this is a little tip. So when you're using sparkle thread for French knots, tension again is key here. So pull as tightly as you can. The other thing that you're going to notice is that it is harder to push the needle down like you normally would with a French knot. And this is because the thread itself is textured, so it won't go through as smoothly. So don't be afraid to push slightly harder. Keep that tension. And as you can see, nice tight knot. Now we're going to do one more, and I'm going to show you what happens when it loops itself and how you can correct it, because I know that can be a problem. So we pull the thread back up, we're going around and round and round, and then we're going to go back in where we've just been, like with a normal French knot, and notice my left hand is pulling nice and tight, keeping that tension. Now if you let the tension go, you might end up with a weird little loop on the front. See, I mean, that's not a problem, but it does look slightly messy. So this is how you correct it. You can pull on the thread on the back, and voila, nice and neat. So let's have a look at doing some basic stitching, just following the edge of a pattern. So if you were going to add a border, this is how we would stitch with the sparkle thread. Now again, tension here is key, and just like with the Ada before, I am using that tension method using my fingers on the back of the hoop just to keep things nice and even. If you end up with a loop such as this one, you can use your needle just to hook up the thread itself, even out the 2 strands, and then pull from the back. And you should then end up with it nice and flat. There we go. So don't panic if you get a loop, you can always correct it. You just need to take your time, look for where the tension has gone slightly awry, and just use your needle to pull it back up and adjust your tension on that stitch. There we go. And once you've gone all the way around, you should have completed your shape. There, we've got a nice little heart there. The final thing that you can use sparkle thread for is tiny little details like these confetti stitches. So again, this is nice and simple. Tension here is key. Try not to twist your thread so that you can get it nice and lying really flat. As you can see here, we're going to pull through and it should lie flat, just like that. Perfect. Okay, and just like with before, you can just tuck your needle underneath the stitches that you've just done. I like to do this twice. Sparkle thread is really good actually at staying in place because it's got all that extra texture, so I wouldn't worry too much about tying a knot or anything. And then you can just take your scissors and snip those ends off. Ta-da! So that is my basic guide to using sparkle thread. It can be a nightmare to stitch with, but with some of these tips, hopefully you'll find it a bit easier. So number 1, make sure that you don't stitch with too much thread at a time. Number 2, use 1 strand of floss, no more. And number 3, tension is key. Make sure that you use that thumb method behind your hoop as you're stitching to keep a nice even tension so that you don't get any knots. And most importantly, have fun, enjoy the process, and don't worry too much about mistakes. Hope that helps.